Driven from the overworld to struggle in the darkness below, the survivors of the crawling chaos had built brand new lives for themselves based on almost nothing. Part of their survival had been down to the teams of explorers who would comb to the caverns for anything that may be useful to the refugees. Their task was dangerous though, as one of the explorers had found out to their own detriment. Only instead of being met with death, he had found unbearable, unending torment, only to finally be discarded and left to rot forevermore.
Gods had begun. Humanity had all players deep and challenging, different is less likely to get me horribly
Time no longer meant anything to the young explorer, and more had passed than he could accurately acknowledge. Slowly though, a form of alertness awoke within his mind, and he began to regain control of his limbs. They had not regenerated like they had before, and yet he was inexplicably able to move them. He had concluded at some point during his captivity that this must be because of the water. He had always thought that rush of life, the rejuvenation he experienced every time he drank, wasn't normal. But how could mere water have that kind of power? His mind still wasn't complete, the years of torture having shattered his sense of reality. Some parts of his mind were still sane, but others had decayed and shriveled, making his thoughts fragmented and his actions erratic. Eventually he rallied enough of both his physical and mental strength to claw his way out of the nest and back up into the cave network. He held little hope that anyone at the camps could help him, if there indeed were any camps left. But he had nowhere else to go, so continued to drag his broken body through the tunnels, hoping he would stumble across what he had come to call home. Soon he learned how to crawl, and then walk again, bare bones somehow able to sustain his weight. After everything he had been through, the dangers of the cavern that he had once feared no longer meant anything to him, and he strode unafraid as the creatures of the dark crevices merely watched him, not knowing what to make of his skeletal figure. After roaming the underground until the cave networks were burned into his memory, he came across not his old camp, but a cabin, now empty and abandoned. Was this the result of the community of survivors? If so, then where were they? He searched the surrounding area, but found nothing of them. However, what he did find would answer questions he had held since being entrapped in that spider nest. He found one of the life-giving pools of water, and in it floated a slime, one of the nuisances they had had to deal with, even on the surface. In his broken mind, an idea formulated. He had heard stories of the primordial slimes, firstborn of the gods themselves. Could it be that the life-giving essence began with them? Before he knew it, he was upon the slime, pulling it from the water and beating it to pieces. Without thinking, he consumed the slime, hoping it would restore his body and mind. As it happened, it would do one, but undo what was left of the other. For his fragmented mind reformed, but the remaining flesh that clung to his body now fell away, leaving only his animate skeleton. So it was true. The slimes did contain the nectar of the gods, the essence diluting into the water, only to be consumed by the survivors. He had already been through too much, so having the rest of his body decay before his eyes was nothing new. For everyone else though, an experience like that may very well break them. Could this explain the abandoned housing? Could they have lost their minds and left everything behind? If so, then what was there left for him? But then he realized he was the only one who knew the secret of the slimes. If he could somehow refine and perfect their essence, then he could restore both himself and his people. His materials were limited though. The equipment in the single cabin he had found not enough to conduct his research, so he set off again into the caves to scour the remnants of what his people had become before their downfall. He collected items of all kinds from across the underground, hauling them to where he needed with only a simple sack. While exploring the cabins, he would come across some of the survivors, now reduced to mindless skeletons as he had suspected. Forced to shatter one in an altercation, he would add their bones to his sack, returning them to his lab to experiment on. Occasionally he would be encountered by explorers and survivors from the overworld. At first he was fearful of them, and them of he, for they had evidently encountered some of his manic, hostile brethren, but soon they became aware of his collection of items, and for them they were willing to trade the valuable chemicals and equipment he needed. In time he would gain the reputation of being a merchant of the underground, and would become sought out by more adventurers, who came to call him a variety of names, typically played on his skeletal figure. He cared not though, for finally he was able to begin his research, and after having locked himself away for a long while, experimenting on hundreds of slimes, he managed to distill an oil from them, one he would proceed to test on himself. During his travels through the underground, some of his bones had become damaged, so he took the opportunity to see if the oil would repair them. To his disappointment, it did not. But then something occurred to him. He removed his own damaged bone and, using the slime oil, attempted to replace it with one of the bones from the survivors. To his amazement and horror, it worked. How could he justify using someone else's body parts to sustain himself? But this would be a process he would need to carry out many more times, and each time he would ask himself that question less and less. It was true that the slime oil had not worked as he had intended, but it was a start, something to drive him forward, with hope that he may one day find a way to recover his people and repay what he was taking from them. As he continued his quest, travelling deeper into the underground to source more resources, he would eventually unveil something that should have stayed hidden. He would find the home of the Medusas, and unbeknown to him, they had been watching. Only now approaching him, they threatened his people, demonstrating how they had enslaved some already, and promised to wipe out the remaining skeletons if he did not do as they instructed. They knew how he traded with the overworlders, so instructed that he must use them to obtain golden trinkets and coinage and return them to the Medusas for a reason that they would not reveal to him. He knew their plans had to be nefarious, but in order to save his people, he would do as they instructed. At the same time though, he made plans of his own. He would at last reunite with his own kind in an attempt to stop whatever the Medusas were doing. This reconciliation though may end up leading to a war for the whole of the underground.
Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did and want to support the channel, then please consider subscribing and hit that bell so that YouTube might possibly inform you when a new video comes out. If you want to go that bit further, please feel free to support the channel on Patreon or go and buy some merchandise on Spreadshirt and Teespring. Links are all down in the description. Other than that, have a great day and I'll see you next time.